sometimes people get these things mixed up, and it'd be really great if Christian and Sabindu, you could just outline a little bit what the difference is for those who don't know. So Sabindu, perhaps you'd like to start with explaining what fair trade is and certification, that kind of thing.
So fair trade is a movement. Yes, certification is a part of it, but it is much bigger than that. And fair trade has been around for maybe about 28 years now. In the UK, we are celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. So this movement, the goal is to make trade fair, as the name says, so that farmers and workers have sustainable livelihoods and can take control of their future. This is the broad goal. And the two main tools that fair trade uses is called the fair trade minimum price and premium, because what we're trying to do is to bring change not by aid but through trade, because the prices that the farmers are getting for the commodities that they produce does not even cover the cost of production. So forget about living incomes and living wages. At this moment, they're just struggling even to meet the cost of production. And we work across a lot of commodities. Cocoa, coffee, bananas are the most popular and most recognized. We also work in cotton, which is very challenging in Africa compared to other countries, and I would say part of it is linked to the lack of supply chains within Africa. And I think we can pick up on other challenges and issues later on. So the main, so fair trade is a certification, but we go beyond that. For example, we do a lot of work on advocacy side, and we understand that this is not just about price, but it is a whole power dynamics as well that needs to be addressed. So we raise awareness with consumers, but also with policymakers. For example, at this moment, maybe for the last few months, we've been talking to the government and ensuring with the Brexit drama that we do not forget that there are producers outside of the EU and the UK who will get affected by whatever trade policies are finally undertaken.
Thank you. And Christian, what would you say, how would you describe fair wear for everybody so they would understand?
I would say fair wear is about putting people back into the center of the fashion industry. Our organisation is a membership organisation, and we have about 80 or so organised companies that are members, representing about 135 mostly European brands. But the way we differ from other organisations is that we work with both the brands and their suppliers. And the brands in particular, we hold them accountable through what we call a brand performance check, in which we actually evaluate the purchasing practices of the brand. There's various statistics going around that speak to the fact that if you look at the impact of brands on factories, about 60 to 70% of the issues that factories face can be addressed at the brand perspective. And you've seen the last 20, 25 years or so of CSR, sustainability, whatever you want to call it, work. The focus has been very much for the factories to change and not for the brands to change. So we operate very much on trying to, again, using your terminology, trying to work in that power imbalance and redress it somewhat so that both actors can take responsibility for the things for which they should take responsibility, rather than just pushing it onto factories to say, well, it's your problem to deal with. And then on top of that, we also have a lobby and advocacy platform in which we push for, kind of same as you guys, we push for legislation, we push for a fair mix of legislation to ensure that the trade policies allow for production in certain countries to be done in a fair way and embraced by other countries. And we really try very hard to get the manufacturing perspective into the rooms of the policymakers. And I guess that I want to make a quick example of how this power balance manifests. Remember a couple of weeks ago, G7 summit, there was that massive announcement by Henri Pinault and his company, but also I think a lot of other brands sign up to that fashion manifesto. And what you would see, if you look at the photo, you see very quickly about the lack of representation from the completely other side. So we are trying our best to ensure that the manufacturers, the workers also have a voice so they can come through and take agency in their lives through whether it's social dialogue and being able to really come to the table with and understand their values so they can actually have the lives that they require.
So both working in tandem, really, so it's not an either or, it's an and situation, and both giving each area a voice. It seems to me that, you know, they couldn't live without each other. It's almost like you need the certification in some respects, and I love what you're saying about brands taking responsibility, because I think this is something that has been lacking in the past, and as you say, working as a designer these days, as a European designer, is, you know, thinking about where the supply chain comes from, supply chain management, and looking at the critical path and how those elements can be sourced sustainably within the region. You don't have to import things all the time, and understanding about creating a difference in that way. So that's really interesting, and thank you for explaining that. That was really well handled, and of course the G7 and everybody coming together and saying, I mean, Tamsin, would you like to say a few words about the G7, because you're probably more experienced about that than me?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me there are, you know, there's been a lot of these, you know, a lot of talk about collaboration between brands, and that is obviously the way forward. I mean, but collaboration with manufacturers, with unions, with, you know, governments, and I think, you know, it says all the right messages, you know, all those brands coming together, but actually they aren't able even to collaborate between themselves. You know, there were certain brands that, you know, weren't part of that because they're direct competitors, and that just, you know, makes a mockery, I think, of the whole thing. And I think people, you know, that actually ultimately, I think governments are going to have to take control of the situation.
Responsibility. Yeah, I agree. I do think we need to push for legislation collectively where we can. It's interesting to hear the previous speaker talk about that, and how that's our focus now. And I hope that we will be reaching that kind of dynamic. It's taken 30 years. Maybe we're on the brink. Let's hope so. So now, other interesting things now. So now, Nyanga and Ngoko, many think that because they're producing a fashion business in Africa, that makes their brand or company an ethical fashion company. Now, would you agree with that, or would you disagree, or how would you describe your brand?
Okay, well, sort of like two questions. First of all, I disagree. Just because you make things in Africa doesn't mean that your company is ethical. Because it has to be, like, it has to be at the core of your business. It's not just going to Africa and what are you doing? Giving jobs to poor people, but you're not paying them any money. Or you are going to places and you're wasting our resources, like the water, you know, like when we use the dyes, a lot of the dyes are not even natural. So they're, you know, releasing toxic chemicals into the water sources and all of that kind of thing. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're ethical because you produce in Africa. No.
So what would you say that your brand does? That
Well, what we do, I mean, when I used to be here, I went back and I thought that just going and working with the weavers or the people that dye things, that makes me ethical, but then it doesn't. So I started to do a lot more research and find that a lot of the threads that come in that we use to weave, we don't produce them, they come from China. And a lot of them are not natural, they've got polyester and all sorts of things in them. And then sometimes you go to, okay, so the place that I go to get my fabric dyed, they're using chemical dyes. And then every time you go back, the quality of the dye gets worse and worse because they're getting cheaper and cheaper things from China because people are not buying the things, they're struggling to make money, and it's just a whole vicious circle. So what I started to do was I didn't want to use anything that I can't find locally. And because it can be such a challenge, like going to the same place and getting the same quality or getting artisans to do what you want, if you're not sitting there, I decided I was just going to make my own fabric. And so we make our own fabric from waste. So I work with denim, I work with cotton, I have invented a fabric that I call Takala cloth. It's a new African fabric. So what we do is that we use the bits of denim and there's a way that we strip and join them together. And so it looks like a traditional woven fabric. And so I think that going forward, African fashion, African artisans, our textiles, we have to innovate and use waste products, use things that are already around, instead of importing all these cheap, things that don't really help the environment at all.
And historically, I mean, designers and artisans and artists in Africa have always been very innovative with their approach to recycling and how they put things together. I think you probably remember all the telephone wire baskets, things like that. And I remember going to the Pompidou Centre a few years back, and there was an amazing exhibition on African art and artisans working in the 21st century. And there were people, like you're saying, they were making jewellery out of like gunpowder cartridges, things like that, like chairs and furniture. And I love this idea that you've just explained so beautifully about patchworking things together to make a whole new, and in fact your work, I was looking at it, with the way you put the ruffles and you're using it's really beautiful. And it's very modern. And it's not necessarily what people always think of when they think of African fashion. And this is really lovely to see this change that's happening. And it's all over the runways in New York this week. And the CFDA winners, it's so exciting to see this global change that is happening in Africa. And we're honoured to have you here. And thank you very much for explaining that. And, it's brilliant. We've got two amazing African designers on this panel who are approaching it in very different ways, but there is a symbiosis with your work. And I think that, the cotton that you've done and the way you've approached the tailoring is really beautiful. And do you find that you're having to do training workshops yourselves? Did you train as pattern cutters, or are you finding it easy to source pattern cutters there?
Well, I taught myself pretty well. My mother taught me and I taught, but everything else I taught myself. And so I have to sort of, I don't have pattern cutters coming in. I still make my patterns, and I work with my tailors, and I teach them how to get things together. It takes a long time because the way that they were taught and what they think is totally different. So they always laugh at me that, oh, I'm bringing the London style. I'm like, yes, I'm bringing it, but learning. You have to keep up and keep moving on, otherwise you're stagnant. Yeah, and you just die. So to keep these things going, I think we just need to move the way we do things traditionally. We need to find a way to keep the traditions but move them forward at the same time.
Well, that's brilliant. So now I've got another question for Tamsin, which is quite a controversial question. So now there was an article in ID recently which was quite provocative, and it says, is sustainable fashion too late? At the root, is a quote, at the root what we have is a consumption problem, a trend that people will eventually forget about. And I've added a moderation to this, as the moderator, or is conscious a movement in itself now? So how would we look at that problem, the consumption problem, and do we believe that it's a trend people will forget, or is that just sensationalism?
Well, I think the issue with that piece and idea, I think that the piece itself was really, really interesting. It was the headline, and it's so often the case that, you know, you don't get to write your own headline, but it basically said, you know, that this is all too late. And I feel I'm part of the global coordination team for Fashion Revolution, and we are a campaign, the campaigns for a more transparent fashion industry. And we are very solutions-based, and the idea of saying that it's all too late and it's all over, I mean, we might as well just go and set fire to our wardrobes now and go and buy a new one tomorrow. I mean, there's just, you know, we can't think like that.
Yeah.
And that obviously is a huge, huge problem in the way that we are now consuming, not just clothes, but everything. You know, food, anything, everything we can get our hands on, we just seem to want it more and more. And everything is so accessible. So I do think we have to really think about the way that we are as human beings actually relating to the stuff that we buy. We need to value it more. We need to start really looking after our clothes. We need to mend them. The minute you start mending your clothes, you really start to see the value of them, and you start to look after them even more. But I think also, you know, I think the brands that are just spewing out more and more clothes because it's cheaper and cheaper to make more and more, we really have to start looking at how that model is totally broken. You know, I mean, we can't keep producing the amount of clothes that we're producing on that level. But that's, you know...
France banning burning now, that's quite
Yeah.
radical, because
Yeah.
a lot of people didn't realise that even happened.
Yeah. Well, I think the news last year about Burberry burning, I think it was £23 million worth of clothes and accessories, was truly shocking to people. And I think a lot of people in the industry have known that this has gone on. And the fact that, you know, that nobody seems to speak out about it, and it just is, you know, seen as the norm, I think that has been a really massive, massive wake-up call to us as citizens, seeing what goes on in the fashion industry, but also to the industry itself, to realise that it will be held accountable and that people won't stand for that.
And the David Attenborough effect?
David Attenborough effect, of course, and you know, and also I don't know if people saw the documentary that Stacey Dooley made, The True Cost of Fashion, which I think had a huge, really profound impact. Yeah, and I think this is brilliant that everybody understands now what goes on behind the scenes in the industry, and I think this is why, you know, really the way forward is to demand for more and more transparency, to want to know who made our clothes, how they're made, why they're made, and that's the only way that we're going to know what goes on in the industry, be horrified by it, and demand that it gets changed.
And that brings us on to our next question, which is for Christian and Subindu. The SDGs came with a remit to almost give hope for the future and a plan forward. How are the fair trade institutions implementing their part for the SDGs for Africa?
So I was referring to the two main tools that fair trade uses, and that's the fair trade minimum price and premium, so which ensures that the farmers are getting more than just more than what they are investing, and they can cover the cost of education, etc. for their kids. Fair trade also it ensures that a small amount, which is called the fair trade premium, goes to the cooperative or farmers, and they democratically decide how they want to use it. Often they would use it in, I would say, the gaps that are left by the government. If there isn't a good hospital, they'll invest in a hospital. If there isn't a school, etc., they will do that. Or they might invest it back into productivity, or smaller businesses to get more income. So hence it is, I think, one of the main SDG that it is trying to address is poverty, and also one that is about zero hunger. There is also a massive focus on gender, we've got the Global School of Leadership, where it is a training to trainer kind of model, where women are given opportunities, and they have set up businesses which are just women-oriented, etc. So there are quite a few of the SDGs, I think about 8 or 9 that Fair Trade can help businesses and governments to deliver on by using the Fair Trade certification and standards for producers.
And just for those who don't know, what is an SDG?
Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, so that's part of the UN initiative.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can look that up. And there's at least, I think there's 15 altogether? 17, 18, yes. So there's lots of ways we can all as individuals play our part, which is exciting. So Christian, same question.
Yeah. I think when the SDGs were announced, they were a kind of a godsend to the brands, because a lot of brands that are doing work on CSR type things basically just had a way to slap a label on and say, look at what we're doing. But I think if you look at what you just mentioned with the burning of goods, 23 million pounds of goods burnt, let me slap an SDG sticker on something, you see there's a massive disconnect between what you're doing and what you say you're doing versus your actions. And I think that exists because there isn't enough connectivity between the people at head office and the people on the ground. And that's where we as Fairwear believe our role is to say, well, okay, we support actively, I think, 3 or 4 SDGs. We try to focus the key ones being equality. So we do a lot of work on gender in the supply chain, and also on decent work, as well as partnerships. And the idea is to ensure that you are able to speak to people in power and authority in the brands to say, hey, when you say you're doing something, you have to understand the entire value chain and the effect that what you do at your head office has on the people and the hours going all the way down. And if, as certain companies, you're able to take that into account, there is no way that you would actually go out and burn that much clothing ever. So we really do try to work with brands, really talk about their responsibility. We go through the process. So how do we affect decent work? It's by helping you to understand at brand level that if you make a decision and then you change it afterwards, and you don't then change your deadline for delivery, there's probably going to be overtime. There's probably going to be on documents of subcontracting. There's probably going to be wage issues. And so we're really trying to connect the brands themselves to that work. At the same time, we then need to work with the manufacturers to say, well, you need to push back at some point. And it's very hard for manufacturers to do so when they are usually under the threat of, well, we'll just move production. Or you need to negotiate better. You said that, I think, you said that there were manufacturers not even able to cover the cost of production because certain, whether it's agents or brands, come and say, well, actually, we want a price from last year. Or we have a price from, we want, we've got another supplier who's willing to do it for a lot cheaper. And so you have to deal with that. So the SDGs are a great tool and a great way to convey messages and to really put a global context on these issues. But it's very easy to kind of plaster it on over what you did without having anything meaningful. And so what we try to do is, we work towards SDGs, and they're a nice thing to have as a header, but we want to actually see the work being done. We want to be able to go into the brands and work with them at a very deep level to make sure it's not just CSR people that are doing this, but across their entire companies, they're able to work towards a living wage. They're able to understand the value of social dialogue, of unionization, if you want to go that far. And I know it's a dirty word in some places, but when we realize that we are where we are, we're able to have our weekends, we're able to have our holidays because of unions, you're able to then understand that there is an urgency for collective action at the factory level that then can help to resolve a lot of the issues that we're dealing with as a whole.
Yeah, and it's very important. One of the things that I was really impressed when I went to work in Peru was that there was rights of association, and that's really, really important, that people have the right to have a union to represent them. And this is something that people don't often talk about. So it's great to hear you talking about that here. And as a designer working in that area for a number of years, you realise that it's not a simple one-size-fits-all solution. It's a big patchwork of many areas coming together and drilling down and trying to do your best. And I think that now design schools are beginning to teach responsibility at the design level and an understanding of how fabrication works, how cradle to cradle works, and what that actually means. And I think that the popularist view of what a designer is, with the sort of frivolity, it's got to change. And I think that's something that's really important, is that designers understand that we're not just RuPaul's Drag Race. It's like we've got to look into our responsibility as designers, and we want to make clothes that make people feel empowered and happy, because that's what good design does. But we have to think about the structure and the people and the supply chain, all the way through from fabrication down to grassroots and the people on the ground. And I think it's really lovely to hear what you're saying, Christian, about the fact with like overtime, and sometimes, big companies, they put on penalties, and the only person who pays really, sadly, is the factory worker. And this is what we really need to come back to. The If You Made My Clothes campaign is massive, done a huge amount of work to make change happen, and I think that everybody in this room here is here for that reason, and it's wonderful that we're all here together. So I just want to have, so I've got two more questions. We've got the big moves towards circular fashion. So this is to everybody really. So we'll just take a few, just if you can, just a few quick sentences about how that would work, what that means to you. So let's just start with you, Nicole. So all with the big moves towards circular fashion, do you see this as a realistic move for Africa?
Yes, I do, because the thing about the developing countries, when the big problems with climate change come, we're going to be hit first.
Climate refugees.
Yeah. So I think that we really have to rewire the way we think about fashion, the way we think about manufacturing, and learn that we need to use, it has to be circular, we can't just keep throwing things away, we have to keep reusing and putting them back into the system, and so that we prevent the waste and we prevent all the damage to the environment. So yes, I do think it is realistic. It's just that we have to change the way we think and the way we work.
So it is fast fashion day.
It should be.
Yeah, Tamsin, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to keep materials in use. I think we have to rethink the whole system around. I think we actually probably can have fast fashion. Controversially, I think we're all, but by fast fashion I mean more cheaper, more democratic fashion. That doesn't mean cheap, but I think if we actually, take the clothes that are already in use, I think we can design a way of actually making clothes that, people can afford and that are from the system, going round and round the system. And I think, as you talked about, rentals and sharing clothes, I think there's new apps coming up all the time about, clothes swaps, clothes sharing, Depop.
Yeah. My nieces are on that all the time.
Yeah.
But then they're still sharing Zara. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, and the resale business, is estimated to be, billions of pounds in the next, 10 years.
And the high street is moving towards that, even Primark.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and H&M moving towards that round. And this is something that I think we talked about 20 years ago, actually, this coming around. So how we're
remaking old.
That's how I started.
Jumpers, you were doing that.
I went to Oxfam Waste Savers, and I was like, okay, we've got this mountain of ways what we can do with it. And because I was based in the UK and we had a lot of knitwear coming through, and I did a lot of work with recycling knitwear because I was just like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with all
No,
this
you
stuff?
were a real pioneer, Sarah, in that, I think. But actually did, really start new conversations and new generations of designers thinking about how they could actually make clothes differently.
I think when I started, I worked as a designer in the south of France, and there was a polluted river sign, and I asked our hosts who we were working with, and they said, oh yes, that's the textile industry. And I was like, oh, okay. And then in 1995, we had a change in azo dyes being banned, and then the heavy metal mordants. But what happened was that they then just got moved out to Asia. So the conversation didn't actually stop there in 1995, sadly. The Stacey Dooley Investigates, her program did actually show you what happened. And of course, the denim conversation with the RLC being like a third of what it was, which is shocking. It's like two sides, I think it was 3 times the size of the UK, and now it's shrunk because of our obsession with denim. So I'm intrigued with your solution, and many other design solutions actually. In fact, I noticed the other day, Converse have now made a shoe which is out of denim, which is reused. And of course, we know that there was a brand before that with Cindy and her brand using textiles for shoe uppers. So these are all great innovative ideas, and I think we do need to look at how we do that. So moving down the line here, so with you guys with the circular fashion, how has that been being expressed in the Fair Wear Foundation? How are people looking at that?
We don't deal with products in that way. That's left to the brands to decide what they want to do with regard to their products. But what I will say in terms of circularity and Africa as a whole is that Africa has kind of always been circular. It's had to be, and you can say necessity is the mother of invention. But if you look at the textile dumping that's happened across the African continent, you'll see that there is obviously a lot of items that have been repurposed, reused for people, for individuals. That itself will continue. As much as there is a growing middle class, there's also an issue with the textile waste industry that we're not willing to deal with yet. But in terms of circularity as a concept, this is something that I think sits with the brands. It's up to them to push it out and to say, actually, this is something that can work. These are the avenues for circularity. So whether it's being able to provide the right venues for returning your clothes so they can be disassembled and reused, or whether it's the opportunity to provide the platforms, like you said, so you can actually go out, rent clothing, and bring it back, and then it's up to the brands to make that work. I think the whole idea about circularity isn't there's a technological aspect to it, but I think it's much more of a sociological, psychological aspect, because we all love new stuff. We all like to go out and buy something and have it and make it belong to us. And that is the thing that I believe really needs to change. It's our attitude towards ownership, to say, actually, it's okay to rent things out. I mean, we essentially, we lease out cars, we lease out homes to an extent when we rent. So why should clothing be any different? So I think really we need to look at that. And then it really doesn't matter where you produce them. As long as people understand they're designed for this assembly process, then yes, Africa can also be one of those places where you manufacture for circularity.
And in fact, a lot of second-hand clothes already find their way to Africa from the West as being one of the major markets for charities who basically in the UK people give their, the Marie Kondo effect. Oh my God. That's like, on one level it's great, but then on the other level you think, well, yeah, so I'm just going to give it to the charity shop, and then the charity shop. In fact, in Australia, some charity shops said no. They were like, we can't cope with the amount of stuff you're chucking out. Yeah, it's time that people look at their consumption. And I love this idea of like the hashtag new to me. It's like, why not? It doesn't, like you say, Christian, we do love to have new things. Everybody loves new things. for the experience of something fresh. But it could be that we could just share within our own circle, or we could share different apps and looking at ways to do that and initiatives in Africa. I don't know whether you're aware of any Subindu that you would be able to point people into.
Then again, not directly from a fair trade perspective, but I think you've mentioned a couple of times that the model is broken. And a lot of things need to be sorted, and circularity is just one of them. I think there's way too much emphasis being paid on circularity at the moment, which kind of also means taking away attention from the other stuff. Christian has already mentioned on the social aspect of what is happening when, when you're segregating clothes. Who's doing that? What kind of wages are those people being paid? Then we also have to come back and have a sense check of reality. What is really possible? For example, as far as I know, at this moment they've not been able to find a solution to separate the polyester from the cotton. And if they do, even when you have recycled cotton, that cotton is not going to be as strong as virgin cotton. So there will always be a need for virgin cotton. It might reduce, as in cotton might become a luxury commodity going forward, and it might not be a commodity anymore. But then what we have to ensure is that the workers are getting the farmers are getting the right price for the cotton. The workers in the factory are getting the right price or the right wages, and the people who are working even in the circular sector, firstly they're counted as part of the supply chain, and their rights, etc., are also addressed. So I think it is a much bigger problem whereas we're focusing too much on circularity, that once we have circularity, everything will be solved. There are a lot of reality checks that need to be brought in. You mentioned Zara dresses. Do we really need those dresses to be hired? So it is a much bigger debate. It will take time. And I always, you mentioned the 23 million that worth clothing being burned, but when you speak to businesses, somehow they never have money to pay the right wages for the workers or the farmers for the right price, but they have 23 million to burn off. So I think it is a much bigger, complex problem that needs to be looked at. Circularity definitely has a role in it, but it's not going to be the end all of the problems of the fashion sector.
Thank you. And finally,
well, like you said, it's not going to be the end all, but it's about finding solutions, right? Like for me now, I've started, and it's something that you'll see more of next season, and it actually emerged from a challenge that's part of for the Green Carpet Awards in Milan. And one of the things that I did is I designed a dress, and now I'm incorporating it into next seasons for my collections, is using waste silk yarns, because this factory that I supply from, basically, like, you have silk yarns that are not fine enough to weave into the textiles, so those get discarded. So I basically got them to dye it and send it to me, and now this is silk fur, and the way in which I embroider it into my dresses, it's actually a beautiful dress. So for me, it's really about finding solutions where you can still create something beautiful without it necessarily being about trying to be trendy, but you're finding something that is waste and turning it into something beautiful. That's it. You're already solving a solution rather than having this silk being thrown off, or discarded, and that's a very important part of our supply chain.
Thank you. That's lovely that you brought that back to the beauty of fashion, because that is frankly what's brought us all in the room. The love of beautiful textiles and pattern and print, and so it's really, thank you for that.